Welcome to a new episode of the Oh My Career Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Hamza Islam. My guest this week is Kevin Patel, who is a climate change activist and the founder of OneUpAction International, an organization that looks to empower and support marginalized youth by providing them resources needed to be change makers. Kevin is one of many people that wants to live in a world where, regardless of a person's background, that they are capable of creating a society that's better for everyone, and I'm super excited to be talking to him. He has had his personal battles, especially with the climate change activism, but no matter the obstacles, he has always found a way to overcome those obstacles, and he is not going to let anything stop him. I am so proud of him and what he has done to get and all the work he has done to get to where he is today. And as a fellow South Asian, it is so cool to see a South Asian or another South Asian do amazing things. So I'm extremely excited for this episode or this interview, and I hope you guys enjoy my conversation with Kevin Patel. Kevin Patel, welcome to the Oh My Career Goodness podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Before we start, I have to say how cool this is to be able to talk to you because just a little bit background for our audiences. Kevin and I are South Asian. I know you have Indian background and my parents are from Bangladesh, but
hmm
nevertheless, I think anytime I get the chance to talk to someone who in a way looks like me, is really cool. And I know for you, it's one of those things where it's great to have support. It's great to have friends who believe in you and your passion project and or whatever it is
hmm
you're doing. But when you have people who look like you that are showing support, it really feels different. It almost feels like you're unstoppable in a way.
It truly does, honestly. And I think that's the power of like not only Desis or South Asians, right? But brown people. And I think when doing this work, I don't see many of us in this work. So it's just really cool to be interacting with you. And hopefully we get more of our brothers and sisters involved in not only this work, but many other different fields that we're usually not represented in, right?
Right.
So it's definitely an honor to be here and to be speaking to you today.
Thank you so much. And let's go straight into your activism because everyone who's involved in activism has a has a start. Everyone has a journey, and oftentimes that journey can be heartbreaking. It can be in a very tough situation. And honestly, I'm so sorry. And this is where I feel I'm so sorry for you about what you had to go through to get to where you are today. You are a
hmm
climate change activist, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that when you grew up, or when you as you grew up, you were diagnosed with an irregular heartbeat because of the conditions you were living in. And so,
hmm
if you were to go back, do you feel that was the moment that really led you to do climate change? Was there anything else you wanted to do? And secondly, given that, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a permanent issue. Like this is something that will be affecting you for the rest of your life. So, what is it like living with that disease, given that this is now going to be part of your life going forward?
Yeah, I'll get started with, if this was something that I got started with, or, was the moment that I got started with climate activism. I will have to say no. Both my parents are immigrants from India. And I think, and their background is farmers, Um, And so my parents essentially are climate migrants coming from India, given that the farming there is just not a livable thing anymore. My father and my mother both taught me practices when I was a very young child, on the ways in which like we can carry our cultural heritage, our cultural identity of who we are and what we are, and that being farmers, right? And so at a very young age I was instilled with that. I never grew up with a traditional you know teenager a regular child's like kind of childhood, right? I never had a regular childhood. Many people would play video games whereas I was reading books and going ahead and thinking about like questions around like plants and animals and all these other things. And so my very early passions was quite awkward and quite weird, given that my parents had taught me a lot of these knowledges of like farming practices, and that kind of filled my head with a lot of ideas. Um, and I think that really kind of sparked my interest in the plant world. And when I was very, very young, I really wanted to become a botanist. And that was what I stuck with. Like, oh, I always told my parents, I was like, oh, I'm gonna become a botanist. I love plants, you know. And I think that was because my dad was teaching me how to grow our own food in our own backyard. And
Mm.
so like the very first issue that I got involved with is obviously food insecurity, food deserts, and food security in the essence of like for marginalized communities. Um, Given that my community of South LA or South Central Los Angeles is a food desert, and so you know, I think out of the bat, like you know, from my father's teachings and from my mother's teachings, taking that knowledge and really kind of tackling this issue of food deserts and food insecurity and you know the broader issue of like how we have inaccessibility to non-GMO, organic, vegan options, whereas you know wealthier communities had that access. They had access not only to that but many more resources than my community or surrounding communities. And so I think that's the very first issue that kind of got led me into not only climate activism but environmentalism. And I think in essence, you know, all Dacey families or you know all Brown families are sustainable in some ways. You know, we love reusing our cartons. I'm sure you have stories of your parents, you know, storing the plastic bags, every plastic bag somewhere, you know,
Right.
or reusing the cookie cans for something else, or putting yogurt in, you know, in another container that was reused from another thing, or you know, just like those type of things. Sustainability is in the mindset of you know South Asians and brown people, um, and so and you know, I think this, from those practices and from those teachings from my parents, kind of really understood like, hey, I can really take this knowledge and use it. And so the very first issue that I got involved with was, you know, again, food justice, and really kind of teaching my peers that there are other ways, other methods of securing healthier foods, and one way is to grow our own food, and another way is to advocate for it. So I think that's you know, began my activism really in sixth grade, teaching about food injustice and growing our own food with about 50, 60 peers of mine, students, right? And really kind of seeing that, you know, yes, there's fast food chain restaurants like one block away from us, but there's more to that, you know. So I really credit my parents in teaching me, you know, how to grow my own food, how to, you know, and all these other sustainability practices. I have to give it to my parents, because without them, I would have never been um, who I am or what I know about, you know, the climate, about sustainability, or these things that we don't even consider sustainability, but it's just a habit, something that we do, right? Inherently sustainable. And so, yeah, my parents are the ones that led me to be, you know, that spark of kind of leading into this big thing of climate activism. Unfortunately, you know, my journey started in sixth grade, but first semester was about food injustice and food insecurity in this one issue. And then second semester of my sixth grade year, I was directly impacted by the irregular heartbeat. So getting into that question of the irregular heartbeat, you know, I was in and out of the hospital for a better part of my sixth, seventh, and eighth grade years. And until my doctor, my cardiologist said, no, we're just going to do a procedure. Um, to, you know, make sure that I don't come back in and out of the hospital, right? I took that procedure in eighth grade, and but now, you know, whereas you know you or anyone else might have like a heartbeat of 90 beats per minute, I'm like you know 112, 120, you know, beats per minute. So I do have a irregular heartbeat still to this day, and I just have to live with it. Um, and it is something that you know, kind of brought a lot of the fears into me of like, why me? You know, I was a kid that was also playing sports, you know, did a lot of running and stuff like that. Cricket is a big game in India. For us South Asians, my dad was teaching me outdoors, so playing cricket and doing whatever we can, you know. And amateur cricket, not the professional. Trust me, because I ain't a professional. But those I was, going from that to just being in and out of the hospital was scary. It's not, it's something, your life changes in a matter of minutes, and you have to adapt fast and really kind of ask your questions. Why is this happening? What is happening? And I kind of knew that, the community that I'm living in is not only being impacted, impacted by multiple issues or injustices, as I call them. It's like, um, we're not only a sacrifice zone, we are a marginalized and sacrifice zone. And in the essence that, these policies, governments, and corporations come into our communities and extract as much as resources and labor and whatnot, oil, everything from our community, but there's no investment in our community and surrounding communities, and that's what leaves us with these injustices or overlaying issues. And so at a very young age, when that happened, second semester, sixth grade year, when I was affected, I kind of like asked my question, like, why am I getting this? I go from being healthy 1 minute to kind of being in and out of the hospital the other minute, and so I kind of put two and two together of like air pollution and smog pollution is what caused it, and really kind of consulted with my doctors and like saying like they're seeing an increasing number of asthma and all these other diseases and whatnot coming in. Um, and so it just kind of accredited to the air and smog pollution that was happening here in, not only Los Angeles, but in my community, given that we live close to freeways, factories, and even oil drilling sites. And now, luckily, the oil drilling sites in South LA are all closed up thanks to the advocacy and activism that has been taking place for such a long time. But I think it's a true, kind of true calling and seeing how other communities surrounding like Wilmington and outward still are going through that. And it's a daily reality to wake up to. It's like, if you were to go outside and really look at the issues that are happening in your community, you can really kind of see that there are multiple issues. There's not just one issue. Even if those issues are not impacting you, they're impacting your community members. And so ever since then, I've been advocating. Yeah, hopefully that answered your second question. I was mainly kind of touching upon my story of like how I really got involved with activism and where I'm at now.
I appreciate what you said because I think it's a journey that you took. It's a one of inspire it's an inspiring journey because of the fact that you are trying to give a voice to marginalized communities, but with that unfortunate circumstance that you now have to live through permanently. And I want to touch before we talk more about your activism. I'm sure you meet a lot of people that are climate change deniers. They'll say, Kevin, climate change is fake. Climate change is not real. Climate change is not affecting me. Why should I care? And as someone who has been diagnosed with an irregular heartbeat and has been
Mhm.
outspoken on how different communities, marginalized communities, aren't usually are affected the most when it comes to climate change, how difficult is it to have a conversation with that person? Because this is personal to you, and it almost feels like you're offended by it, but to them they think of it as like a different way. So how hard is it to have those conversations?
For me, I think I'm asked this question quite a lot, and um, it's not a difficult one. I think it's just a human one. It's a human question of like, how can you relate to them and their issues?
Hmm.
It's something of like, why should they care about what I'm going through when they're going through some other issue or some other problem? And so I think I relate to them in an emotional way, in the sense of asking them questions of why they don't believe in climate change. Why do they not believe in the science, right? And then I also kind of empathize. If they have a family, I empathize with them, or in the sense of if they have kids or they have external family like aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and just kind of thinking about like, well, what about your brother? What about your sister? What about your children? What about your family, the next generation? Who's going to have to see a world without polar bears or see a world without the the Amazon rainforest or see a world, just kind of coming up with these questions of, what world would you want to leave behind for your kids? One that is completely destroyed, or one that is prosperous, works for everyone, that is there is some justice, um, for those communities who have been harmed historically, but there's justice overall, right? Equity, equality, and I think that the world that we imagine, and I think that's some of the conversations that I usually have. And, there's an interesting conversation that I had with a gentleman who just outrightly did not believe in climate change. I sat with him and just kind of heard his concerns, heard his point of view first before I interjected with my point of view, and really kind of had this conversation that was really eye opening to see like where he's coming from. And, some other times it's more of like it's not affecting them. A lot of the times, a lot of the climate deniers, they always are like, well, it's not affecting me, why should I care, right? I don't believe in this, it's not happening to me, I don't see it. And so I think it's just about sitting down with that person and making them realize that it's affecting people all around the world. While also, it's like if it's not affecting you now, it will affect your grandkids or your kids, or their family that they leave behind. And so I think they have a sense of duty to kind of do something about it or be outspoken about it. And I have been able to change some mindsets, in believing in climate change and doing something about it, even if it's minuscule. It's like even if they're utilizing their voice or doing something, signing a petition or something like that. That's a first step, right? And in acting and doing something. And so that's that has kind of been very more powerful. Just having the conversation, really, emotionally talking to them of like, what issues are you facing? What issues do you care about? And then kind of connecting them with climate change little by little, um, and making that connection. So I don't think it's a difficult one. I think it's just more of talking to them and seeing what issues they're facing. Now it's a whole different story when you're talking about those who are, believing in conspiracy theories and right wing, kind of media and mass media and whatnot. That's a whole different story. I've only had to deal with, you know, conservatives that are more, the traditional conservatives. And there are a lot of people who are conservative that do believe in climate change. And I think um, just talking to them and saying like, hey, you have to be more bold in your own, in your community and the people you surround yourself with, to be outspoken on these issues. Even if it's not affecting you now, it will affect your kids or grandkids or your family members, right? Um, so yeah, thank God I haven't had to deal with the far, right, or extremes. But it has been one, like, I have had those conversations with deniers, and you'd be surprised how many of them you can actually, make them understand where you're coming from. Only if you're open to having those conversations.
I want to bring the conversation back to identity because
Yeah.
you have been very outspoken about how when you first started being involved in climate change activism, that you didn't see a lot of people who looked like you. And I was thinking
Hmm.
about that for a very long time. I thought, well, climate change activism is a lot like a South Asian wedding in the fact that there are a billion people. And I was confused by that. I was like, what does Kevin mean by that? And then obviously we have met many times before this podcast, and I think it really goes back to what it means to be South Asian and what it means to be Desi. And I want to kind of bring that question back. So for you, what does it mean to be South Asian? What does it mean to be Desi? How much does your identity play a part in your activism and in your life going forward?
Yeah, I think it plays a huge part, right? I'm a son of an immigrant. I'm a one who's been affected by climate change, and also the color of my skin. It's much darker than most traditional activists in this, who are amplified, and so it's both a privilege, also a burden in the sense that um, I understand that there are not that many of us there, and I call it a burden is that I think there needs to be more people who look like us, um, not just brown people or Desi people, right? I mean, everyone, Black, Indigenous, people of color, who have darker skin, to be involved in this issue because traditional media and I'll get back to my identity, but I just want to talk about this a little bit tangentially, in the sense that traditional media usually doesn't, amplify or platform those who have darker skin, and so it's kind of been a burden on me, being um trying to bring in more voices, not just from the South Asian community, but from all communities who are being affected by the climate crisis to highlight their voices, highlight their stories, highlight their experiences, and highlight their communities at the end of the day, right? Because it's not just them that's being affected by climate change, it's their communities and the places that they grew up, the places that they love. And I know that's the same thing for me. It's like I was not the only one that was affected. It was my community, the people that I love, the people that I looked up to, and I wanted to do something for them. But going to my, really going back to my identity as a South Asian, I think um, it's something that for the future, I think, and even now, it's something that I'm proud of. I'm proud to be South Asian. I'm proud to represent the South Asian American community, and Indian community, the Desi community in general, and really be an advocate for them to kind of utilize their voices as well in every spaces that we're in. When we're really huge in the tech industry, we're really huge in the motel and hospitality industry. And so I think just kind of, talking to our community members, we're really able to kind of cause a domino effect of like them wanting to actually speak out and be outspoken on these issues, right? And I think I also carried my identity again, without me being South Asian, I would have never been in this space of like of doing activism in the first place. So I think I credit my identity with that in some sense. I don't know, it's weird to say that, but
No.
um, it's just like my parents, again, kind of going back to my parents and how they kind of taught me not only to be sustainable, but to be to grow our own food and I think, yeah, a lot of the knowledge that I get is from my parents. So I'm proud to be South Asian American and um, first generation American, and a son of immigrants. And I usually don't say that. I think this is the first time I'm kind of saying that, but I think it's something that needs to be said. A lot of the times we want to assimilate to this the American society or this socially constructed society of like what we are meant to be or what we are to be. And I think right currently I'm kind of awakening to the fact that um, I need to kind of make that connection again with my community, and that community being my Desi and my South Asian community. And so I'm still making those connections, and hopefully in the future, I have much more of a tie to not only my cultural identity, but my cultural heritage in general.
I honestly applaud you for being able to say how proud you are of being South Asian because oftentimes, like you said, it's very easy to just kind of give up who you are as a person. And I
Yeah.
understand that at the end of the day, it's one of those situations where it's like, because we are growing up in a environment where there are more people who don't look like us, it's so easy
Mhm.
to be able to just say, let me give up some of who I am just to be someone I'm not. And it's almost like a
Yeah.
short-term thing rather than a long-term thing. And that's why I think being able to talk to people who are South Asian, it's weird because we can be the worst enemy or our own worst enemies, but we can also be our best allies. And
There you go.
I
I
and
also say,
no, go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. I was just gonna say, like, I think at the end of the day, it's also like the names that we choose for ourselves, right? Like my brother, he changed his name from a cultural heritage standpoint of like, having a name that is tied to our culture to one that was more Americanized. And I think my name, Kevin, it's an Anglo name. It's not a Desi or South Asian name. I could have been easily called Raj, Om, or Shiv, or one of these traditional cultural names that we
Yeah.
have for ourselves. But I think we've lost that because we assimilate to what the surroundings or the environment that we're in. And I think and that's also something that I'm reckoning with, is that that is something that I have lost, but I am making that connection, because there's ways of saying Kevin in Hindi and Gujarati and whatnot, in our languages, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's something that I'm kind of reckoning with, and like really kind of seeing how cultural identity, cultural heritage, and all of these really are interconnected, and how I can best, kind of get rid of and dismantle, or these notions of who I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to be, with my cultural identity being put to the side. Because I think at the end of the day, I can't do that. I have to have my identity be a part of who I am, and what I love to do. And so it's been a journey. It's one that I'm still learning and unlearning a lot of things, and it's going to be quite interesting to say the least. And I'm sure a lot of other people are coming to that realization now. It's just like sitting down and saying like, okay, well, how's my name connected to my cultural identity, cultural heritage, and why was I assimilated to have this name, right? And I think I've had those conversations with a lot of my Desi or South Asian friends who are in the movement as well, in the climate movement or other movements. There are other movements that Desis are part of, which is amazing. And so just having those conversations with them has been quite interesting and eye-opening, to say the least.
As an activist, it is one of the most dangerous fields to
Hmm.
be a part of. And I know there are a lot of young people who are passionate about a certain issue. And the higher, or I wouldn't say the higher, but the more passionate you are, you unfortunately meet people who intend to harm you in a way. And
Hmm.
kind of like how you talked about how you will meet people who will say climate change is fake, or hopefully not like conspiracy theories or anything, but we you are someone that is a human being at the end of the day. You are not just a climate change activist, but you are a brother, you're a friend, you're a son to many people. And one of the scariest things that you told me was that you often face death threats because of your work in activism. And
Hmm.
you will always live in a world where people are going to say things and it's about them, but not about you. And it's very easy to just say, you know what, they're just an obstacle. But when you get to that extreme, it is so hard to be able to focus, because ultimately, this is not just going to impact you, but it's going to impact so many people around you. And I would love to know how you're able to keep going, almost like what's your why despite all the stuff that you're receiving. And is there ever a moment where either you or your parents or anyone that just says, "Hey, Kevin, we love what you're doing, but you need to shut this down because your life is more important than anything else"?
Yeah, of course. No, I don't know how I'll answer that question. It's something that is it's a constant thing, right? I think one of the things that I always try to keep the privacy is such a huge thing for me and my family. It's like I'm always shielding both my parents, and obviously I use them because they're part of my story, right? But I don't give out information of who they are. Nor do I, tell people that I usually have a brother. It's a shock to people in the movement as well as other people. Oh, like Kevin has a brother. Um, but just shielding my family and my friends, my close relatives, from the work that I do, and protecting them, because yes, it is something that I've received multiple death threats and threats in general. um, but I think having thinking about my family and protecting them is always first. um, and Yeah, I've shielded them from just all of that. I mean, we had, my parents and I, and as along with my brother, have had conversations of like, just how to, protect myself, and how to make sure that, I'm surrounded with good people, and not to give away my location and stuff like that, or whenever I'm doing an event or whatnot in person, because it is quite scary. And I think another thing is like, why do I continue if I receive all these like pushback and death threats and threats? I think my why is because, my community is still facing these injustices. And if I'm not able to speak out, if my community is not able to speak out, we're going to continue being oppressed and continue having these injustices be plaguing our community for decades, right? And so nothing will ever be done, and we will never get justice. And I think that's something that keeps me pushing. And I have a life motto in saying, like, um, I will never let anything, whether it be obstacles or adversity, stop me from doing what I want to do or what I love to do. And I stay with that so much. And that's my why. It's like, this is the reason why I do it. You know, these people, who are sending me these things, you know, I wish them luck, but I think at the end of the day, I can't stop that from happening, right? You're always going to get pushback from every direction. And it also gives me the kind of energy to keep pushing, to keep pushing, and to keep going without having this be a distraction and worrying about what might happen to me. Um, Millions of people have already died, by the hands of climate change and by the hands of all these injustices. And so, what's to say that I'm doing a disservice because I got a death threat, of like someone sending a death threat, um, and I stopped my activism, I stopped using my voice, and I just let this continue to happen, right? They have won, and I don't want them to win. I'd rather have our communities win. I'd rather have my community win. I'd rather have the planet win. And so, I think that's a reason why I continue to do what I do and continue to be outspoken. Um, yeah, I just don't let this noise. I think of it as noise. Yes, it's pushback, but I think of it as just noise, and um, blocking that off and just really protecting my energy and who I am, um, and just continuing. So yeah, it may be scary, but there are, I'm with a community that is protecting me, and I'm protecting them in the best way that I can, and just I keep going.
Wow. Well, hey, I tell you what, I applaud you for the work you're doing. Honestly, you are an inspiration to me. And that's where I want to transition to because oftentimes whenever I meet you, I will hype you up in the most extreme ways possible. I will say, Kevin, I can't believe I'm talking to you. This is so cool. And yeah, in a way, you do deserve that hype because you have done it. You have made a difference in people's lives, and I respect that. And that's where I want to talk about One Up Action because this is an organization you founded where you want to give young people the resources to succeed, want them to be able to be change makers. And I've brought in many guests in the past to talk, and they're all young people, particularly the Gen Z generation, to be able to. And then the common question is, how are you able to let yourselves be known? Because in a world, you're going to be told that you should be taking a seat. Hey, you'll be there in the future, but not right now. I'd love to know more about what One Up Action means, not just the background behind the organization, but what One Up means in general. And given that you are someone who has led climate change protests in the state of California, do you feel like creating this organization really propelled you into becoming a leader of some sort?
Yeah, of course. Wow, that there are many questions and many directions this question could go into. I will start with, I think why I believe in young people, right? And that notion of like, well, we will have our time in the future, right? And in that sense, I call that bullshit, because our generation is coming up with the solutions. They're innovators. They are creatives. They are just amazing, amazing, talented, you know, young people who are doing what is needing to be done now to really make the difference in our communities and the world for both the people and the planet, right? And so when I hear this, like, oh well, we'll have our time. Well, young people don't deserve a voice right now in government. No, that's completely, BS. We from that kind of that mentality leads into, me wanting to say, well, young people are not just the leaders of today, they're the leaders of tomorrow and, tomorrow and today, and so, and I've been, saying that so much to in front of in front of the young leaders and as well as in front of politicians. And a lot of the times politicians love using that same notion. It's like, yes, young leaders are of today, the leaders of today and of tomorrow. And how are we integrating young people into these conversations, into the decision making tables? And some of the times it just doesn't happen. And so it's up to us as young people to make sure that it does happen and continue using our voices. In one instant, I'm just going to do a tangent here. It's like I saw many young people at the height of 2019 when the first climate strikes happened here in California, especially in Los Angeles, how many young people were coming from 2 or 3 hours from different cities to Los Angeles to strike on behalf of climate and behalf of their communities. And I had a lot of conversations with many of them. And I was just very saddened because I knew that they didn't have a voice within their own community. And I asked them, why aren't you able to strike in your own community? And a lot of the answers was just they just don't have the opportunity to, or they don't have that, there's not that much of a momentum there. They don't have a voice there. And they have to travel so far to have their voices heard. And that led me to like, how can we have every voice heard? And LA County is, here in the United States, it's the most powerful local, government in our nation. Whatever LA County does, a lot of other counties, a lot of other cities follow suit. LA County is not just one city, it's not just LA City, it's 88 cities. Um, and so with that, I worked with my good friend Delaney Michelson. Her and I got to pass the first ever Youth Climate Commission, becoming the first ever in the nation, first ever in the world, never done before, to give young people a power to utilize their voices, not only on policy, but for their communities to make a difference, right? And also look at creating new policies and new motions on behalf of climate sustainability, um, and, and justice. And that, I just became a commissioner for the Youth Climate Commission just recently. And so, and that's giving a voice to young people. But going to OneUpAction and why OneUpAction exists is that the same year in 2019, from all that happened, all those conversations of doing the strikes, rallies, and marches, I saw a tendency of like, yes, one, it's all done and said, right? When the strikes and rallies and marches are all done, what are we doing? We're just going back to our communities. Are we actually taking action within our communities? Are we making the difference within our own communities and making sure that our communities get justice? And I wanted to fix that. It's like when we're done with the striking, when we're done with the rallying, when we're utilizing our voices, when we're, doing the activism and advocacy on the streets, when we're done with that, when we go back to our communities, we should also step up our action or one up our action. And I think that's where the name comes from, is that we have to one up our action within our communities. And so that's kind of where OneUpAction started. It's like, let's, start a coalition, start an international movement of young people, really kind of when they're done with their climate strikes, or when they're done with their advocacy on the streets or utilizing their voices, to go back into their own communities and take action, and really move the needle on climate and climate solutions. And we've kind of transitioned from that to being very, concise or consolidated. Instead of just focusing on all the activists, right? We consolidated to a solutionist. And so now we're launching 3 new programs that are very consolidated to focusing on the solutionists that are, kind of implementing and accelerating climate solutions on a, not only in their own communities, but in neighboring communities, and using those as case studies for local governments and governments in general to say, well, if we can do it here, then you can do it on a much higher level, right? And so just pushing that narrative of like, we need to start implementing climate solutions. So we've gone from focusing on all climate activists in 30 different countries, with over 5,000, 4,000 young people, a part of our networks, to really kind of consolidating and really focusing on those solutionists who are really making that, difference to push push us where we need to be at. And so that's, the journey of OneUpAction of like why it came to not only be a platform for those who never had a platform before, and also make sure that we're focusing on marginalized and BIPOC people, so Black, Indigenous people of color, because that was also something that really kind of was lacking, and it still is, but it's getting better, right? Where a lot more of our voices are included.
Before I let you go, you as a climate change activist, everyone has the goal of spreading awareness of this issue and also living in a world where climate change is no longer a problem. And you are someone that not only wants to make sure that that doesn't become a problem in the future, but also you want to be able to say, hey, marginalized communities are being affected and we need to help them. And then also not only that, but inspire the next generation of people that it doesn't have to be someone who, like when it comes to like looks or how they look, it's like we shouldn't judge them for like your ideal person. It's that anyone can make a difference. It doesn't matter where they're from or where they're from or who they are. For you, in an ideal world, what does that look like for you? Like, do you think we'll, whether it's maybe in your lifetime or after, what kind of world do you hope to envision? Whether it's about climate change activism or just activism in general, what kind of world do you hope that we could live in someday? And do you think it will be possible in your lifetime, or do you think after your lifetime?
I'm a very optimistic person. I believe in young people too much.
Mhm.
And I say too much is because they're already doing the work. They're already doing everything that needs to be done. There's millions of us that are utilizing our voices and speaking out against injustices happening on multiple levels, on multiple issues. And so I'm very optimistic in that fact that we will get the world that we want. Um, and what that ideal world will look like for me is that we no longer have to be activists. I do believe that it will happen in my lifetime, not the next, right? And so I think, I believe in the power of young people. I believe in the power of Generation Z. I believe in the power of just young people in general who are working on multiple fronts to really kind of get us justice, get us, move the needle to an equitable and really just world. And I don't know. I find always like, what does the world look like? I always say, one simple answer is a world without activism, one where communities are not plagued with injustice, one where communities are able to live in unoppressed, don't have to worry about the systems of oppression or anything that, kind of causes these things to happen. And so I do believe that young people are making a lot of strides in these directions to get us where we need to get at. And I think um yeah, I don't know, I'm like tripping up on this question because it's like it's a simple answer, but it's also something that I'm like, well, what will our world look like in the next 30, 40 years? I may never be able to tell you what it looks like, but I can tell you that I'm very optimistic about it because I do see so many people taking actions. I see these amazing young people who are creating the solutions for the future and for that are being implemented now. And I think that's what makes me very optimistic about the future is that I can see it. I can see what it can look like only if we continue to utilizing our voices. Sorry, only if we continue to utilize our voices and continue making um, continue making these connections of the issues that are going on in our communities, and making sure that we're actually implementing the solutions to solve them. And so, yeah, for anyone that is getting involved with activism or wants to be an activist, you just have to utilize your voice. And that's the biggest thing that I always say is that if you want to imagine a world free of injustices, use your voice. See what injustice or what issues going on in your community, and use your voice. Call your congressman or congresswoman or congressperson. Write a letter to your local city council. There are many action steps that you can take to make a difference. It's not that hard, to make a difference, to make a change. And I think, you kind of forgot to ask, what does it mean to be an activist or what does it mean to be an advocate? And I always say everyone can be an activist, an advocate. you just have to use your voice. I always use those words interchangeably because I think um, it's not that hard. It's like everyone wants to. This world is, I've been an activist for 11 years now, and I have a lot of faith that with everyone utilizing their voices and doing as many actions as they can, we can truly make the change that we want to see. And I have seen a lot of change happen, and so that's also why I'm really optimistic about the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, and even the future. So
You
yeah.
you are one of the most inspiring people I've met, and I have to tell you, when you meet people who look like you, as being South Asian, when you're seeing young South Asian people in the front lines in something, it is really special to see. And honestly, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for being a champion for young people. I know oftentimes people, you might not get that back because we talked about the death threats and everything, but the fact that you are still saying like, hey, look, yes, there are bad apples, but at the end of the day, majority of the people want to make the world a better place. Thank you for being a part of that, and I'm really excited to see what's in store for the future. And I know you are South Asian, so I have to say this. I hope we do meet in person at a curry restaurant. It can be any curry restaurant, but yeah, I really hope we can one day just eat curry together and talk about life.
Let's do it. I can't wait. And thank you so much for having me as a guest on this podcast. I can't wait for it to come out. And yeah.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Thank you guys for continuing to support this podcast, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode.